I still remember the look on her face that evening. Eyes wide, mouth slightly open, the color draining from her cheeks like paint washed off by rain. The dining room had gone silent, forks frozen in mid-air, wine glasses trembling slightly in unsteady hands. My son stared at me, first in disbelief, then in a dawning horror that he couldn't quite hide. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. All I said was, "You never asked whose name the house was in." That was the moment everything shifted, the moment truth arrived. Calm and undeniable. Like the sound of a clock finally reaching the last second of a long-awaited hour. It wasn't anger that filled me. It was something quieter, older, and far more final. Justice, when it comes for the patient, doesn't shout. It whispers. But before that dinner, before the wine glasses, before the confession wrapped in silk, I was just a father who believed love could outlast greed. The months leading up to that night felt ordinary, at least on the surface. I had turned 73 that spring. My knees had started complaining before the rest of me did, but my heart was still strong enough to climb the stairs of the old house I'd built with my late wife, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. When my son and his wife pulled into the driveway on my birthday, I remember wiping my hands on a dish towel, trying to hide the tremble of excitement. Family visits had become rare. He was always busy. She was always running errands. But that day, I told myself, things were changing. Maybe they remembered. They walked in carrying a box wrapped in silver paper, a red ribbon tied so perfectly it could have been printed from a magazine. My son's smile had that polished shine of success, expensive suit, new watch, the scent of cologne that cost more than my grocery bill for the week. His wife followed behind, her heels clicking against the old wooden floor like tiny hammers announcing royalty. "Happy birthday, Dad," he said, his voice loud and rehearsed, as if someone were filming, and for a moment I believed it. He handed me the box, and I laughed the way you laugh when your heart's trying to believe what your mind already doubts. Inside was a sleek leather jacket, black, soft, far too luxurious for a man who spent most of his days feeding pigeons by the park. It still smelled of the store. I could almost see the tag marks where the price had been carefully removed. "It's from both of us," she said, flashing a smile too quick to be sincere. "We wanted to make it special. After all, you've done so much for us." So much. The words hung there like perfume, pleasant at first, but choking once you stayed in it too long. We had lunch together, or rather, they ate while scrolling through their phones. She showed me pictures of a car she'd been thinking of buying, a white convertible that shimmered like polished bone. He laughed about work, investments, some new business deal that was finally paying off. I smiled through it, all, even when she said, almost jokingly, "We'll make sure you never have to worry about anything again." If only she knew how ironic that would become. That night, when they left, the house felt quieter than usual. The leather jacket hung on a chair, untouched. I sat in the kitchen, the same place where my wife and I used to sit long after midnight, whispering plans about the future, our boy's education, the savings account, the house that would someday belong to him. She was gone now, but her presence lingered in the scent of lavender on the old curtains and the framed photo above the counter. In it, she was holding our son as a toddler, his cheeks round and bright, his eyes fixed on something beyond the camera, already reaching for a life we hoped would be better than ours. We saved for decades to make that life possible. Every paycheck I brought home, I'd split it 3 ways: food, bills, and a small envelope marked future. By the time retirement came, that envelope had grown into an account that could carry us through old age comfortably, maybe even help him start his own business. When my wife fell ill, I used part of it for her treatment. The rest I left untouched, an anchor of security in a world that moved too fast for people like me. That money had always been sacred, which is why, 2 weeks after my birthday, when I checked the bank statement and saw the withdrawal a large, precise sum that left my balance eerily thin, I thought there had been a mistake. At first, I called the bank. They told me the transfer was authorized under my account, electronically through my representative. Seen had never appointed one. Then they said a familiar name, the same one printed on the return address of every holiday card I'd ever received. Brenda, my daughter-in-law, the T. Room went still. I sat there holding the phone, the voice of the clerk fading into static, my mind struggling to reconcile the numbers with the faces I loved. I called my son immediately. He didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. Hours later, a message arrived. Dad, Brenda handled some things for you. Don't worry. I'll explain later. That later never came. Days turned into weeks. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Something inside me, perhaps the last fragment of my wife's patience, whispered to wait, to watch. I started noticing small things, the way Brenda's car changed, how their weekend visits stopped entirely, how my son's tone on the phone grew shorter, the warmth replaced by polite distance. Then, one afternoon, while walking past the cafe near the park, I saw them through the window. She was laughing, tossing her hair back, showing off a sparkling bracelet. He looked proud, distracted, and far too comfortable. On the table between them sat a small gift box, Cartier red. Unmistakable. I walked away before they saw me. That night, I poured myself a glass of the cheap wine my wife used to mock for tasting like dust and regret. I sat in her old chair and stared at the EEFE photo again. The silence was heavy, but not empty. It was waiting. Waiting for me to decide who I was going to be, the fool who kept forgiving, or the man who finally listened to the quiet voice saying, "Enough." Weeks later, he called again, cheerful as if nothing had happened. "Dad, how are you liking the jacket? We've been meaning to come by. Brenda's been busy with some projects." "I'm fine," I said, steadying my breath. "You know, I noticed some funds missing from my account." There was a pause, a single second too long. Then came the laugh, smooth and dismissive. "Oh, that. Yeah, I told Brenda to move some of your savings into a better investment account. It's safer, higher yield. You'll thank us later." "Did I sign anything?" I asked. "Come on, Dad. Don't worry about paperwork. You trust us, right?" The old me might have said yes, but that version of me was gone, buried with the woman who used to remind me that love without respect is just charity. I smiled into the receiver. "Of course I trust you, son. After all, family comes first." He relaxed instantly, laughing again. That laugh, that careless, confident sound became the rhythm of my resolve. I hung up, and for the first time in months, I felt something other than hurt. I felt purpose. The next morning, I went to the cabinet where I kept the house deeds. Old folders, neatly labeled in my handwriting, carrying the legacy of 40 years of work. One of them was marked property title. I opened it carefully, and there it was, the official document, signed, notarized, sealed. The house, the one they assumed would naturally pass to them, was still under my name completely. They had taken my money, but they had forgotten who built the foundation beneath their feet. I smiled, a thin, tired smile. My wife once told me that true revenge doesn't need cruelty. It just needs time to ripen. So I waited. By autumn, invitations went out for their 10th anniversary dinner. They were hosting it at the house, my house dressed up with rented chandeliers, floral centerpieces, and catering trucks that blocked the entire driveway. When my son called to invite me, I could hear the echo of laughter in the background, the clinking of glasses, the music rehearsals. You'll love it. Dad, it's going to be classy. Brenda wanted to make sure you felt honored tonight. Honored. That word again. Always spoken when people want to distract you from how little they respect you. I accepted the invitation, quietly. Not because I wanted to celebrate, but because I was ready for the curtain to rise. When I arrived that evening, the place barely resembled the home I had built. They had repainted the walls white, replaced the worn-out furniture, added new chandeliers that sparkled like frost. Everything looked expensive, but none of it felt alive. It was a house that had forgotten its heartbeat. Guests filled the living room, business partners, neighbors, distant relatives. They all congratulated the couple on such a beautiful home. Brenda floated among them like a hostess at a charity gala, her dress shimmering, her voice soft and artificial. My son was by her side, shaking hands, smiling, completely unaware that every corner of this evening had been bought with my own blood and years. I stayed quiet, nursing a small glass of wine. No one asked how I was doing. No one noticed the quiet old man sitting near the window, watching everything he built being turned into a prop for their performance. Until the moment came. Dinner was served roast beef, red wine, laughter bouncing off the walls. Then my son raised his glass. "To my father," he said, smiling. The man who taught me everything about hard work, patience, and generosity. We wouldn't be here without him. Applause. Polite, shallow applause. Brenda leaned over, pretending to wipe a tear. That's when I decided it was time. I stood slowly. The chair legs scraped softly against the floor, a sound that made the entire room fall silent. I lifted my own glass and smiled. Thank you, son. You're right, you wouldn't be here without me. Laughter, uncertain and scattered. I let it fade before I spoke again. You know, I said calmly, it's funny how life works. On my birthday, you gave me a beautiful gift, a jacket I could never afford. I was so touched, and I remember asking how you managed something so extravagant. You told me you wanted to honor me, that it came from your heart. I paused, eyes moving from him to Brenda. But recently, I discovered something else. The funds for that gift and a few others came from my own account, my own savings. The silence that followed was heavy enough to bend the air. Brenda's smile vanished. My son blinked rapidly, searching for words. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some pretending to sip their drinks just to avoid the tension. So, I continued, still calm, I decided I should honor you in return. Tonight, as you celebrate your 10th year together, I wanted to give you both something unforgettable. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a small envelope, official papers, folded neatly. This house, I said, still belongs to me. The title was never transferred, and as of tomorrow morning, it will be listed for sale. The proceeds, I assure you, will go to a cause that truly knows the value of gratitude. The words dropped like stones into water, rippling through the room. Through their pride, through every lie they had told themselves. Brenda gasped. My son stood, his voice trembling. Dad, you can't be serious. This is our home. I looked at him with a softness that felt almost merciful. No, son, This was our home, until you decided my love was an account you could withdraw from. Then I raised my glass again. To lessons, I said quietly. May we all learn them before it's too late. The guests didn't clap this time. They just watched, and for the first time in years, my son had nothing left to say. That was the night everything began to end. And the night, I realized that sometimes silence is the only sound revenge needs. After that night, when the guests finally left and the house emptied of laughter, I sat alone in the backyard under the dim porch light. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't the kind that suffocates. It was the kind that listens. Somewhere inside, I could still hear Brenda crying, her sobs muffled by the closed kitchen door. My son was trying to calm her, saying things like, "He didn't mean it," and "He's just confused." But I wasn't confused. For the first time in a long time, I saw everything clearly. The night air smelled of overwatered roses and leftover perfume. The grass, once soft beneath my feet, now felt foreign, like I was trespassing on my own land. I looked at the house, glowing with light and music only hours ago, and it struck me how much of my life I had spent maintaining those walls, those windows, those little details no one ever noticed until they were gone. Every nail, every brick, every coat of paint had been a promise to give my son a life where he'd never know struggle the way I did. And yet, there I was, watching him lose himself to the same poison I'd spent decades protecting him from: entitlement. The next morning, the house felt eerily quiet. Sunlight crept through the curtains, soft and golden, landing on the dining table still cluttered with half-empty glasses and abandoned plates. A vase of wilted lilies stood at the center, Brenda's decoration choice. She liked things that looked elegant from afar, but couldn't hold life for long. I poured myself a cup of coffee. The smell of burnt grounds filled the kitchen. As I sat down, I noticed a small stain on the tablecloth, a drop of wine, dark and perfectly round. It looked like an omen, a quiet symbol of what happens when joy ferments too long into something bitter. For hours, I didn't move. I just sat there, staring at that single mark, replaying every conversation, every laugh, every polite dismissal I had tolerated over the years. I remembered when they first asked for help, a down payment for their first apartment. They were newly married, young, hopeful, full of dreams. I didn't hesitate. I gave them what I could, even dipped into my retirement fund because my son had said, "Dad, it's an investment in our future." I believed him, and maybe that was my first mistake, confusing love with rescue. My late wife used to warn me about that. She'd say, "You can't teach gratitude to those who think they deserve everything." But I never wanted to believe she was right about our son. Can still hear her voice from those quiet nights when we used to count bills together at the kitchen table. Her hands were always moving, folding receipts, straightening paper, her wedding ring glinting under the yellow light. "You spoil him too much," she'd say, and I'd laugh, tell her, "He's our only child. He'll understand when he's older." He didn't. He only learned how to take without asking. Later that day, I drove to the park, our park, the one where my wife used to feed the pigeons while I read the newspaper. The same bench where we sat the day our son told us he was getting married, his eyes shining with love and ambition. Back then, I remember thinking how proud she looked, even though I could see the worry behind her smile. She never said it out loud, but I knew she sensed what I couldn't, that Brenda's affection was as thin as the paper her wedding invitations were printed on. I sat on that bench now, alone. The trees rustled softly, and the fountain gurgled like a voice from another time. Children played nearby, their laughter echoing across the grass. It felt like life was reminding me that innocence still existed, just not in the places I had placed my trust. Took out my wallet and looked at the faded photo inside, my wife, standing beside our son on his graduation day, both smiling, the sun catching the side of her hair. I touched the edge of her face with my thumb. "You were right," I whispered. The following week, my son came by. He didn't call first. He just appeared at the door with a forced grin and a box of pastries. The kind he knew I liked. "Dad, can we talk?" he asked, standing awkwardly on the porch. Behind him, his car gleamed in the sunlight, spotless and new. I nodded and let him in. He walked straight to the living room, pacing like someone rehearsing lines for a role they didn't believe in. "Listen," he started, "about the other night. You embarrassed us. You didn't have to say all that in front of everyone." I leaned back in my chair, hands clasped. "I didn't embarrass anyone," I said softly. "I just told the truth," he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You could have talked to me privately." "And would you have listened?" I asked. He didn't answer. That silence, small, heavy, evasive, told me everything. He tried to smooth things over. Said Brenda had misunderstood, that the money transfer was temporary, that they intended to pay it back. But his eyes, his mother's eyes, couldn't hold my gaze for long. "Dad, you've always said family matters more than money," he said. "I did," I replied. "But now I understand sometimes money is the only way to see what family really means to some people." He froze, and in that moment, I saw the boy he used to be, uncertain, ashamed, desperate to prove himself. For a brief second, I almost pitied him. Then I remembered how easily he'd let her touch what wasn't hers, and the pity turned into steel. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house creaked around me, as if it remembered all the footsteps that had once filled it. I got up, walked to the kitchen, and made tea. The kettle's whistle filled the silence, and I realized how long it had been since someone else's voice had warmed these walls. On the fridge still hung an old magnet shaped like a heart, faded and chipped. It was a souvenir from a family trip years ago. I had bought it at a gas station back when my wife was still alive, and our son was still humble enough to say thank you without calculation. I took it off and placed it on the table. That small gesture, simple, meaningless to anyone else, felt like the closing of a chapter. In the days that followed, I kept to myself. I began going through old boxes' receipts, letters, photographs. Each one was a reminder of who I had been, and who I had become by loving too blindly. There was a letter my wife wrote to me before she passed. I found it in the bottom drawer of the desk we shared. The ink was faded, but her handwriting was still the same, steady, elegant, full of care. It said, "If you ever find yourself alone, don't confuse peace with silence. And if he ever forgets what we taught him, don't remind him with anger. Remind him by showing him what consequence looks like." Folded the letter carefully and placed it in my jacket pocket. That single paragraph became my compass. Didn't want revenge for revenge's sake. I wanted balance, and echo of accountability that would ring where gratitude had gone missing. A few weeks later, Brenda called. Her voice was fragile, as if she were testing how much control she still had. "Dad," she said sweetly, "I just wanted to apologize for everything that's happened. We didn't mean for things to get out of hand." I listened, silent. "You know how these things go," she continued. "Finances, misunderstandings, emotions. I hope we can move past it. The family needs peace." Her words were crafted like perfume, careful, alluring, designed to hide the stench beneath. "Of course," I said calmly. "Peace is important," she exhaled, relieved. "So we're okay?" "Yes," I said. "We're okay. But peace, Brenda, it doesn't mean forgetting. It means letting time do its job." I could almost hear her confusion through the receiver. "Time's job?" she repeated. "Yes," I said quietly. "It reveals what patience hides." Then I hung up. From that day forward, something inside me changed. I stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. I stopped justifying my son's decisions, and I stopped pretending that love required blindness. Every morning, I'd sit by the window with my coffee and watch the neighborhood wake up. Couples walked their dogs, kids rode their bikes to school, the newspaper boy tossed headlines of other people's chaos onto driveways, and I realized peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the refusal to be ruled by it. But still, deep down, I wanted them to understand, not through words, through consequences. So I started taking small steps, quiet steps. I went to the bank again, this time in person. The teller, a young man with kind eyes, recognized me immediately. "Mister," he said, "we're sorry about the confusion before. Would you like to review your account authorizations?" "Yes," I replied. "And I'd like to make some changes." He nodded, printed the documents, and walked me through every option. I removed every external access, no representatives, no shared permissions. Then I asked him a question that made him raise an eyebrow. "Can you prepare the paperwork to list a property for sale? Under my name only?" He hesitated but nodded. "Of course. Is everything okay, sir?" I smiled faintly. Everything's finally starting to be. That evening, I found myself standing in the living room again, surrounded by the ghosts of a life built on trust. The ticking of the clock echoed like a heartbeat, steady and slow. I looked at the walls, the photos, the furniture. Every piece told a story, most of them happy, a few of them painful. Then my eyes landed on the large family portrait near the staircase. All three of us, smiling, the illusion of unity captured forever in pixels. I walked up to it, stared at it for a long moment, then took it off the wall. The glass cracked slightly as I set it down on the table, and I whispered, "You can't build gratitude on a lie." Days turned into weeks, and the silence in my home no longer felt lonely. It felt purposeful. I started walking again, tending to the garden, reading old books I had ignored for years. I was learning to enjoy my own company. But beneath that calm, a current of anticipation grew. Not anger, just inevitability. They thought the storm had passed. They thought I had accepted it all with old age and forgiveness. But forgiveness, I realized, is not the same as permission, and so I began preparing quietly, reorganizing papers, calling lawyers, reviewing accounts. It wasn't out of bitterness, it was out of clarity. Every betrayal, no matter how sharp, leaves behind something useful, a mirror, and in that mirror, I finally saw myself not as a victim, but as the last person in my family still capable of teaching a lesson worth remembering. Because sometimes, the kindest thing a father can do is stop protecting his children from the consequences of their own choices. It began on an ordinary morning, the kind of morning that carries no warnings, no drama, just the quiet ticking of time. I was watering the plants in the garden when I saw their car pull into the driveway. The new one, the one I never gave them permission to buy. It shimmered under the sunlight, silver like a blade. Brenda stepped out first, sunglasses on, dressed in perfection. My son followed, wearing the kind of suit that made him look like a stranger. He waved at me, too casually. The same hand that once held my shoulder now gestured like I was a neighbor, not his father. They came smiling, always smiling. I learned that smiles are masks when used too often. "Dad," my son said, "we wanted to drop by. Thought you'd want to see the car." I wiped my hands on my jeans and looked at it. "Beautiful," I said calmly. "How much did it cost?" He hesitated for a second, glancing at Brenda. "Don't worry about that," she said quickly, her tone light and rehearsed. It's a gift from life, you could say. A gift from life. No mention of the savings that had vanished. No hint of guilt. Just the kind of arrogance that grows when people think you'll never call their bluff. I smiled. Well, I said, life seems generous to those who already have enough. She didn't answer. My son laughed nervously and changed the subject. We wanted to take you out for lunch, Dad. My treat. Your treat. My money, I agreed anyway. Sometimes silence makes people speak more than questions ever will. We went to a restaurant overlooking the ocean. I hadn't been there in years. The smell of salt in the air mixed with grilled fish and old memories. Brenda ordered wine without asking. Expensive, sparkling. She lifted her glass and said, "To family." I lifted mine, too, though my hand trembled slightly. I wasn't sure if it was anger or grief anymore. As the waiter left, I asked, "Do you remember when we used to come here when you were young?" My son nodded, smiling faintly. "Of course. You and Mom always brought me here after report cards." "And what did she always say before we ordered?" I asked. He thought for a moment. Then he looked down. "She'd say, 'Don't order what you can't pay for.'" I nodded slowly. "She had a good sense of balance." Brenda forced a laugh. "Old wisdom," she said. "But we live differently now." Yes, you do, I thought. You live on borrowed ground, both literally and morally. After lunch, I excused myself and walked down to the shore while they waited for the valet. The sea was rough that day. The waves crashed like arguments you can't take back. I stood there watching them until I felt something shift inside me. Not rage, not vengeance, something cleaner. It was the moment I decided to stop waiting for remorse that would never come. It was the moment I realized I had been protecting their comfort at the cost of my dignity. And that realization, as painful as it was, felt like breathing fresh air after years of stale silence. I whispered to myself, "You've already forgiven them. Now teach them." When I got home, I opened the drawer where my wife's letter rested. I read it again, the part where she wrote about consequence being the most powerful teacher. I pressed my hand against the paper and whispered, "I'll do it your way." The plan didn't come overnight. It came quietly, like fog moving through familiar streets. It began with paperwork. I contacted my lawyer, an old friend named Walter. We'd known each other for decades, and he had always admired my patience. This time, I think he saw something else in me. "You're sure about this?" he asked after I explained what I wanted. "It's not just about the money?" "It's never about the money," I said. "It's about the principle, about teaching them what ownership really means." He leaned back in his chair and smiled. "You always did have a poetic sense of justice." "I'm old," I said, "but I still believe lessons should be remembered, not forgotten." I began by reviewing every asset, every paper, every deed. The house was indeed still mine. The accounts were secure now, restructured, moved out of reach. Every step I took was methodical, not driven by emotion, but by clarity. I wasn't trying to destroy them. I wanted them to see the reflection of what they had become, to feel, just once, the weight of taking something that wasn't theirs. In the evenings, I'd sit on the porch, notebook in hand, writing small reminders to myself. Patience equals control. Control equals peace. And, sometimes, kindness without boundaries breeds cruelty. I found myself remembering things I had forgotten, like the day I taught my son how to hammer a nail without bending it. He was 10, and I had told him, "If you rush, it breaks. If you slow down, it holds." He didn't know that lesson was about more than carpentry. It was about life. Weeks passed. They didn't call, they didn't visit, but I knew they were still enjoying what wasn't theirs. Through a neighbor, I learned that they had started hosting small gatherings at the house. The same house I still legally owned, the neighbor said, laughing. "They live well, your boy and his wife. You raised a real success." I smiled politely and said, "Success is measured differently, my friend." That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept picturing them in that house, drinking wine in the living room, maybe even mocking the old man who was too soft to fight back. But they were wrong. Softness is not weakness. It's restraint, and restraint is what separates justice from vengeance. One evening, I went through a box of old photographs. There was one from our first Christmas in the house, my wife in her red sweater, my son opening a toy truck, laughter frozen in time. I held that picture for a long time and said aloud, "I gave you everything so you wouldn't have to steal. But you stole anyway." The next morning, I visited the lawyer again. "I want to update my will," I said. "And I want it airtight." He raised an eyebrow. "You're cutting them out?" "I'm giving them a chance to learn," I said. "Not a chance to profit." In the following weeks, I took pleasure in the smallest acts of preparation. I had the property appraised. I met with potential buyers discreetly. I even visited the city office to ensure the title. Records were perfectly clear. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been slowly taken away. I remember walking home one afternoon, carrying the new documents in my hand. The wind was strong, the sky gray. A storm was coming. I smiled at the timing. Nature always seemed to know when the human heart was shifting weather. When I reached the porch, I stopped and looked at the old oak tree in the yard. My wife used to hang wind chimes there. The sound of them used to fill the evenings with peace. Now, they were gone, replaced by silence. So I decided to put them back up. I bought a new set, soft bronze, and hung them there. When the wind blew, the gentle music reminded me of her, and I knew she would have approved of what I was doing. About 2 months after the dinner incident, I received a message from my son. "Dad, we're thinking of remodeling the house. Maybe new floors. Would you mind transferring the title soon? The bank says it'll be easier to handle future paperwork." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "Let's talk about it soon," I wrote. Face to face, he agreed, suggesting lunch that weekend. When the day came, I dressed carefully. Wore the same jacket they had bought me with my own money. Irony has a taste, and I wanted to wear it. We met at the same oceanfront restaurant. He was alone this time. I could see the tension in his face, even before he spoke. "Dad, I feel like things have been weird between us," he began. "I don't want you to think we were trying to take advantage. We just thought it'd be easier if Brenda managed some finances." I stirred my coffee slowly. "Easier for who?" He blinked. "For everyone." "For everyone," I repeated, nodding. "That's what people say when they want to take something that belongs to someone else." He sighed. "Come on, Dad, don't make this dramatic." "I'm not making it dramatic," I said. "I'm making it real." He leaned forward, frustrated. "You're still angry about the money. I told you. It was temporary." "Temporary theft," I said quietly, "is still theft." His face flushed red. "We're family, and that," I said, "is exactly why it hurts." The rest of the conversation was short. He tried to appeal to sentiment, to my age, to the illusion of forgiveness. But forgiveness without accountability is surrender. I told him I loved him, but love wasn't permission anymore. When I left the restaurant, the sun was setting. The horizon burned orange, and for the first time in a long time, I felt light. Every decision I had made in silence was leading to something inevitable, something necessary. I went home and wrote in my notebook again. This time, only one line. "Tomorrow begins the education." That night, I sat on the porch beneath the oak tree. The wind chimes sang softly in the dark. The house behind me stood quiet, filled with memories, ghosts, and lessons. I thought of my wife again, how she used to say that truth arrives late but never lost. The truth was finally on its way. I wasn't planning revenge anymore. I was planning justice. And justice, when it's honest, doesn't rush. It waits until the moment will be remembered. When I went to bed, I left the window open just a little. The air smelled of rain, and as I drifted to sleep, I whispered to the silence, "Let it begin." When I woke up the next morning, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of renewal, the kind that follows long storms. I made coffee and stood by the window, looking at the world the way a craftsman examines his work before making the final cut. Everything looked ordinary, but that morning, I knew that nothing was ordinary anymore. The first part of justice is silence. It's the patience to let people believe they've won. So, I began with quiet. Observation. I learned their habits, their patterns. I didn't have to spy. The world does that for you when people are careless enough to post every detail of their lives online. Their photos told me everything I needed to know. Brenda's smile was always the same. Wide, painted, practiced. But her captions told the truth. She thought no one could read between. "Hard work pays off," she'd write beneath a picture of their new car, or "building our dream home" under a photo taken right inside mine. I collected those posts like evidence in a courtroom that hadn't yet opened its doors. Then there were my son's updates, business meetings, vacations, investments, always chasing more, always forgetting who helped him start. But what struck me most wasn't their wealth. It was their blindness. People who think they've taken everything never notice what's left in the shadows. I went to visit my lawyer again. The air in his office smelled faintly of tobacco and old paper. Walter greeted me with a knowing smile. "I take it you're ready to move forward," he said. "Yes," I answered. "It's time." We sat across his mahogany desk while the city buzzed faintly through the window behind him. I explained the plan in small, deliberate steps. Nothing cruel, nothing impulsive, just a mirror of consequence. First, the house. It would be formally listed for sale, but privately. No public signs, no agents dropping hints. It would remain invisible to them until everything was ready. Second, the accounts. I had already separated what was mine from what they assumed was ours. Now, I transferred what remained into new holdings under a trust with one beneficiary, my grandson, the boy who always greeted me with warmth, who had once spent an entire afternoon helping me clean the garden while his parents argued over which restaurant to visit. Third, the will. A clean rewrite. Simple, sharp, unambiguous. Everything I owned would bypass them completely, unless they demonstrated genuine restitution, a condition written carefully in Walter's dry, lawyerly language. It wasn't vengeance. It was instruction. That afternoon, I stopped by the local bank again. The young teller smiled politely, and I handed him the necessary forms. He asked, "Are you sure you want these changes to take effect immediately?" "Yes," I said. "The sooner lessons begin, the more time people have to learn." He didn't understand, but he nodded respectfully. Within minutes, the paperwork was done. I walked out into the street with a sense of quiet satisfaction. The kind that comes when you plant a seed and already know what the harvest will look like. I began spending more time outside again. The world seemed to speak differently when you stop carrying anger. I walked by the ocean, by the park, by the bakery where my wife used to buy her favorite rolls. People greeted me kindly, not knowing that behind my calm nods was a plan unfolding with the precision of a clock. One afternoon, I ran into my grandson. He was walking home from school, backpack bouncing against his shoulders. When he saw me, his face lit up that rare, unfiltered joy I had missed in his father's generation. "Grandpa," he said, running up, "Mom said you're mad at them." I knelt down, smiling. "I'm not mad," I told him. "I'm just teaching." He frowned a little. "Teaching what?" That love without respect becomes expensive, I said softly. He didn't understand, but someday he would. I slipped a small envelope into his bag, one addressed to Walter. Keep this safe, I said. You'll know what it means when you're older. He nodded with innocent seriousness, and we talked about his school projects, his favorite books, his dreams. I realized then that not everything was lost. He was proof that love still had roots, even in poisoned soil. A few weeks later, I received a call from my son. His tone was smooth again, too cheerful to be genuine. Dad, we've been thinking, he said. Maybe it's time you moved in with us. You shouldn't live alone at your age. There it was, the second attempt. The sweetened offer to regain control. I appreciate that, I replied calmly, but I like my space. Come on, he insisted. The house is too big for just you. I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. Yes, I said. It served its purpose. But don't worry, it won't be my burden for much longer. He chuckled, assuming I meant I'd sign it over soon. That's good to hear, Dad. Brenda was worried about the maintenance. Tell Brenda I've already found a way to take care of it, I said, and I hung up before he could answer. That weekend, I went through the house one room at a time, collecting items that held meaning not to keep, but to release. My wife's piano sheet music, her collection of seashells, the photo albums she loved. I packed them carefully and placed them in boxes marked with our grandson's name. Then I sat in my workshop, where the scent of wood and oil still lingered from the old days. On the workbench lay an unfinished carving, a small wooden box I had begun years ago but never completed. I decided to finish it that night. The process was slow, meditative. Each movement of the knife, each curl of wood falling away, felt like a prayer. When I was done, I placed inside it a copy of my wife's letter and the new deed transfer papers. It wasn't revenge, it was inheritance of truth. Days later, my lawyer called. Everything is finalized, he said. The sale can proceed the moment you approve. Perfect, I replied. Now, let's talk about how to deliver the message. Walter leaned back in his chair, half smiling. You want it to hurt? I shook my head. No, I want it to echo. He understood. Then we'll do it formally. They'll receive notice by courier during their next event. You said they're planning an anniversary trip? Yes, I said. Send it then. Let the timing teach the rest. The next weeks were strange calm on the surface, electric underneath. I still went about my daily routines, but there was a stillness in me that others must have felt. Even the neighbors noticed. You've been glowing lately, one woman said. Good news? I smiled faintly. Not good, just fair. Every night, I rehearsed in my head what I might say if they confronted me. I didn't plan to argue. I would let facts speak. People forget that truth is the most silent weapon. It doesn't shout, it reveals, and reveal it would. One afternoon, I received a call from Walter. It's done, he said. The notice has been served. I thanked him, then walked outside and sat beneath the oak tree. The chimes above me swayed in the wind, singing their soft, metallic tune. In that moment, I felt my wife beside me again, the same quiet pride she used to show whenever we finished a hard task. I imagined Brenda's reaction when she opened the envelope, her manicured fingers trembling, her smile fading as she read the words. I imagined my son's confusion, his denial, then the slow realization that everything he thought belonged to him was never his to begin with. Justice doesn't need an audience, but that night, I almost wished I could have seen their faces. The next day, he called me. His voice was shaking. Dad, what did you do? I made things right, I said. You sold the house? Without telling us? I took a deep breath. It was never yours to sell, son. He fell silent for a long time. Then softly, You humiliated us." "No," I said. "You did that yourself when you mistook kindness for weakness." He tried to argue, but words fail when the foundation beneath them collapses. Eventually, he said, "We have nowhere to go." I paused. "Now you understand what it feels like to lose a home that was never truly yours." There was a silence on the line that stretched like a shadow. Then he hung up. I stood there, holding the phone, feeling no triumph, only peace. Later that evening, I visited the house one last time. It was empty now, the air echoing softly with the memory of laughter that had long turned hollow. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, whispering my goodbyes. In the kitchen, I found one of Brenda's perfume bottles still on the counter. I picked it up and set it outside, letting the wind carry the scent away. Then, in the living room, I left something behind the small wooden box I had carved. I placed it on the mantel beneath the framed photograph of our family. Inside was the letter from my wife, and a note of my own. "To those who forgot the meaning of giving, may you remember it when something is taken." I locked the door and handed the keys to the agent the next morning. When the sale was finalized, I didn't celebrate. I simply sat by the ocean and watched the waves roll in, slow and endless. For years I had believed love alone could hold a family together. But love, I realized, must be anchored to truth, or it drifts into manipulation. I still loved my son. That would never change. But love doesn't mean returning to blindness once you've opened your eyes. I had given them everything: money, trust, opportunity, and in the end, I gave them the most valuable gift of all: the mirror. A week later, I received a message from my grandson. It was short, written in the awkward spelling of a child, but filled with honesty. "Grandpa," Mom cried, "Dad is angry, but I understand." "You were right," I smiled as I read it. "Children see more clearly than adults sometimes," I replied. "Be kind to them, but remember what truth looks like." That night, for the first time in years, I slept deeply. The plan had worked, but not because I had won. It worked because the noise was gone. The pretending was over. The debt between love and respect had finally been balanced. And as the chimes outside whispered in the night wind, I whispered back, "Justice, my love. Just as you said, quiet and clean." They showed up at my door 3 days later. The air was thick with summer heat, and I could hear their car engine idling at the curb as if they weren't sure they wanted to come inside. When I opened the door, my son's face was pale. Brenda's eyes were swollen from crying. "Dad," he said, voice trembling. "Please, we just need to talk." I let them in. The house they once claimed now echoed with emptiness. The furniture gone, the walls bare. Every sound seemed louder: the click of her heels, the rustle of paper as he held a folded letter from the lawyer. "You sold everything," she whispered. "Even the house," I nodded. "Yes, I sold lies and bought peace." She looked away, and for the first time since I'd known her, the arrogance had vanished. My son stepped closer. "We have nowhere to go." I studied his face, the face of the boy I had once carried on my shoulders, the one who promised to make me proud. "Then start over," I said quietly. "Build something that's yours this time." He tried to speak again, but no words came. Brenda took his arm, and they left without another word. I watched from the window as they walked down the path, hand in hand, two people finally stripped of performance. That evening, I sat on the porch under the oak tree. The chimes above me sang softly in the wind. Across the street, life went on, children laughing, neighbors talking, the faint hum of a television through an open window. I closed my eyes and felt the kind of silence that doesn't ache anymore. It just breathes. My grandson visited a week later. He ran to me and hugged me tight. "Dad says he's sorry," he murmured. I nodded. "That's good. Saying sorry is where rebuilding begins. He looked up at me, curious. Will you forgive him? I already did, I said. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering without bitterness. We sat there for a long time, just listening to the wind. Sometimes justice doesn't need thunder. It just needs a door to close and another to open. I didn't ruin my son. I reminded him what happens when love turns into expectation and gratitude turns into greed. The house was gone, the money moved, but the lesson remained. And as the sun slipped beneath the horizon, I realized that everything I lost had simply changed. Form, my wife's patience, my work, my sacrifices all had returned to me as peace. When people talk about revenge, they imagine fire. But real justice is colder. It settles, quiet and certain, leaving behind only clarity. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent, or would you have taught the lesson they refused to learn? Tell me in the comments. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to remember that dignity can still win even in silence.